Hello, 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 and welcome to Live with Jesse and Melva. Thank you so much for joining us for our series called Secrets to Lasting Love. And we thought about this series a lot, and we know that there's a lot to lasting love. I mean, after being married for 44 decades, there's a lot of things that we've learned. And the things that we learned that has supported us, we don't want to keep those things a secret. We share them with our clients, whether they're in counseling or whether they come to our workshops, and we want to share them with you as well. So since we have so many, this series is going to be a long-term series. So I hope you're okay with that. I'm excited and ready to go. So, secrets to lasting love. This time, we're focusing on secret number 5. So far, we have shared with you 4 secrets that are very important. And what we're doing is we are establishing the foundation for strengthening the foundation of each person in the relationship. And then we're going to navigate toward strengthening the relationship itself. Because in a relationship, it takes 2 parties to be part of the dynamics of what each person experiences, whether they're in person or whether they're thinking about their experiences when they're alone, like when they're at work or when they're meditating or when they're having happy memories, when they're having memories about conflict or frustrations and that kind of thing. So our goal is to support you to begin within, which is what we had to do. We did try it the other way and it didn't work for us. So let's review what we have covered so far. And what we have covered so far, we started with a story of James and Marian. And actually, this is going to be their whole story throughout the series. So their date nights, and those of you who have heard it before, we're going to, the theme is how to turn date nights that turn into argue nights back to date nights. So Marian and James married for such a long time, and they do love each other, but they get stuck at this one place, and they don't understand why. So they did get to the place that they decided that they had so much going in the relationship when they did their pro and con list. They had so much going in the relationship that it was worth trying something new because what they were doing was not working at all. And then the second thing that happened was that they began to learn the psychology of not just the relationship, the dynamics. Like if you were looking at a story or looking at a movie, you would see what is happening on the surface. They were aware of what was going on the surface, but they didn't know the psychology of what was going on. And so one thing that they discovered was that they have a 7-year-old inside that's guiding the show, that's guiding the story, that's guiding the behavior. And they're only aware of what the other person is doing, because anytime a person is triggered or frustrated and what have you, they become self-absorbed in their own experience, their own frustration. So it's very difficult to do what we call differentiate, and that is to be aware of the other person's experience. And if they're not aware of it, they certainly cannot have compassion for it. So we're going to support you in having more information about that down the line. So they discovered the psychology of the 7-year-old that lives within them. It's the way that their brain is wired and has been wired since they were 7-year-old, about how to determine or detect whether there was safety or threat to an important relationship. And their relationship is important, has been important for over the decades. So they discovered the role of that 7-year-old within. And then the third secret was they took a week to journal their experiences and they did have a couple of arguments that week. So they were able to journal their experiences and what have you. And when they shared their journal, they were able to see how the other person was impacted. And then the fourth secret was the understanding that those wounds had to be healed. And so that's where we are right now. That James and Marion are very aware of how they impacted the other person. That's what I'm trying to say. How they impacted the other person when they were frustrated and angry. And so we introduced this concept of what that looks like and what that sounds like. So in Imago, that is the relationship theory that we're certified in and do workshops in, a theory that we love, 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 because the understanding is not in, a lot of therapeutic kind of terms. And I can go there really easily. Jesse's better at it than I am, but it's a practical way of looking at the psychology of relationships. So the two behaviors that we identified last time was minimizing and maximizing. And so James and Marion knew that they were wounding each other when they were in conflict. And they were introduced to the term minimizing and maximizing as a reactive defensive pattern. But they didn't know like their own profile. They didn't know, what that really was, minimizing and maximizing. So we want to explore that a little more this time with you, give you more information about that this time. So let's look at the minimizing and maximizing profile. So when you see the image that we have for you, that the 7-year-old that is unconscious, that does the scanning of what's going on in the experience, in the here and now, it doesn't really have eyes to see. Well, I guess maybe a little bit, but mostly it's like a body experience. And so the body experience is a person, excuse me, who is an observer or in the experience of someone who's really, really angry. At a cellular level, what they experience is like an alligator coming at them, or a tiger coming at them, a predator ready to attack them. Now, Harville Hendricks, because this is the Imago theory, he calls them hellstormers. And since maximizing could be part of my profile, I don't like that term, hellstorming, even though I know I can raise a whole lot of hell, but I like the part about that, or a tiger. So anyway, but that's what the other person experiences when they are upset. So that's one profile. The other profile is called minimizing. So minimizing what a person experiences when they're the recipient or in a interaction with a person who is experienced as shutting down. They would call that, they would describe that experience of what it's like when someone avoids them. Because a turtle goes into their shell. And you may be aware of the times that you're in a relationship with someone, or in your particular relationship, and communication breaks down, that one person is striking out, that would be maximizing, and the other person shuts down. Well, that's how people protect themselves. And when they're flooded with emotions, there's no logical thinking going on. There's no reasoning going on. In that moment, it's just about protection, each person protecting themselves. And it's like, because you hear a lot about when two people go at it, that the goal is to win, and sometimes to win at any cost. So I want to say a little more about minimizing and maximizing. So let's say in James and Marion's case, that the person who takes on the maximizing kind of role, that would be Marion, because when she gets upset, she's like all over the place. She kind of explodes. I mean, she tries to, be calm and cool and collected, but when those buttons get pushed, she's out there. I mean, really out there. And so a person who maximizes, they protect themselves by blowing things out of proportion. I mean, because in that moment, it's what it feels like. It feels so big to them. It feels so big. And this is a person who, in their love relationships, they depend on their partner to show up in a certain way so that they feel secure. And when the person doesn't show up that way, and they can't do that when there's communication, especially if they are in a relationship with the person who shuts down, then all kind of anxiety comes up. And so they're trying to repair the connection. Are they trying to repair it? They're just trying to get it back. They don't quite know how to get it back. Right. And the way that they react makes things worse, right? Mm-hmm. And so the other person in the relationship will experience them as nagging and will experience them as clingy, because in that moment, if a turtle is the other partner, they just want to get out of there. Because, see, for a person who has a maximizing kind of profile, having disconnection in a relationship with their partner, the disconnection itself is painful. Even the thought of a possible feeling of disconnection when things are sensitive, when there are big problems, even the thought of the possibility of their partner shutting down and disconnecting from them is sometimes really too hard to bear. And that's why sometimes you see this out of control kind of behavior. Now, remember, it's not the adult part that's in charge. It's the 7-year-old in charge. The 7-year-old way of processing reality. They're also the person who has a maximizing kind of profile. They are experienced as aggressive. Well, sometimes they are. I mean, they're trying to get that connection back. Now, the way they're doing it is not working, but that's what's happening.
That's the unfortunate thing with all of this, particularly in relationships, is because the couple really wants to have a close, connected, loving relationship. Mm-hmm. But when they have differences of opinion, different ways of addressing things, they want to get it back, but they don't know how.
Right.
And that's what's so unfortunate, mm-hmm. is that if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why people like you and I are out here in the world trying to teach people another way of being able to address their differences and conflicts so that they can restore the connection as rapidly as possible.
Mm-hmm. By sharing with them what we did,
right,
to overcome what I did to overcome my maximizing, what you did to overcome your minimizing. Yeah. So, and to be able to be aware of it, and we'll talk about that a little more just a little bit later, it's so important to know how you try to take care of yourself, even if it's not effective, and it's not. Right. But if you don't know that you don't know what you don't know, it creates even more problems. So that's Marion. So James is the turtle. So James, when there is tension and conflict, it's just too overwhelming for James. So like a turtle, because remember we're using the alligator and the turtle, because these are, primitive ways of defending oneself when things go awry. Mm-hmm. So he goes within. I mean, he hides. Because, you know, sometimes you can be in a situation with the person, especially if a person is maximizing, and they're just going on and on and on and on, and maybe finger pointing and maybe criticizing. And, you know, the turtle is just overwhelmed. The person who has that kind of profile, they're just overwhelmed. And so for them, being in connection that the maximizing person is trying to restore, the connection itself is too painful.
Right.
So they don't want any part of it. And so an explosion of emotions, that's really scary for a person who has a minimizing kind of profile. So they keep their feelings in. And so many times I have talked to couples, and Jesse has too, where one partner will say, and it's usually a male-female situation where the female is saying, he just won't talk, and he won't talk about his feelings. And so when she's talking about feelings, she's talking about the explosion that she does when she's feeling upset and anxious. He doesn't want any part of that. And so he's going to stay in that shell. He's just going to stay there. And so she wants him to come out and share his inner world and what's going on. And that doesn't feel safe for him. He's not coming, because the belief is if he comes out and shares his feelings, so I'm talking about James, and it does apply to the Jameses of the world. If he comes out and he shares his feelings, especially angry feelings, then the minimizing person doesn't want to hear it. And we'll try to change, in James and Marion's situation, would try to change his mind about what he's feeling. That's what Marion does, because that keeps her safe.
And I'd only add, that is, if he knows what he's feeling.
Yeah.
Because as a minimizer, before I turn the page on that,
mm-hmm.
You'd ask me, what do you think? What do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a clue. Okay.
And I would think, you just don't want to talk to me.
Right.
You just want to.
Mm-hmm.
You just being mean.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the thing. And people need to know that dynamic of what's going on. If a person has a minimizing profile, they have to know that beneath the surface, they are scared out of their tree.
Right.
I mean, the anxiety is overwhelming. That's the part to get to. And we're going to talk about that a little more in just a minute. The person who has a minimizing kind of profile, what they need to be aware of is that they need to invite safety to come out of the shell.
Mm-hmm.
And the minimizing kind of person needs to know that they have to be in a safe space. They can't be all over the place and criticizing and finger pointing, because that does not create safety. Here's the other thing about the person who minimizes. Just because they go in that shell doesn't mean that those feelings are not there. What happens is, not only are those feelings there that they don't want to talk about, but those feelings will simmer and simmer and simmer. And eventually they'll go to a slow boil. And then all of a sudden there's this big explosion. And then the other person has no idea what just happened. Maybe they said that the person dropped the spoon to the tea or something like that. But when it gets to the last straw, the person who has the minimizing kind of profile, they react. And they react in an intense way. And sometimes it's really, really scary. So that's why that awareness is so important. And we're going to, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about how to do that. So actually, this is the minute now. Because James and Marion, they know how they wound each other because they saw each other's journals. And they both had remorse for that, because it's like, I didn't know I had that kind of impact on you. Mm-hmm. And then when they discovered their profile, their reactionary profile, Then they said, first they gave themselves a hard time. It's like they didn't want to own it. And it was like, they felt really bad about it. I remember one time when this was the beginning of the marriage. And I remember I asked you something and you wouldn't answer me. And then I would ask you again and you wouldn't answer me. And then I would get to the place that I was so angry with you. I let know it 15, 20 different ways. And I remember asking you, I forgot what I asked you. I asked you, it was something like, why won't you talk or why won't you respond or something like that? I can't remember exactly what I said, but I remember exactly what you said. You said the reason why, you said nobody in my family talks that loud. I said, excuse me. I said, well, how do you get your point across? Because in my family, my parents would speak at an elevated tone when things got a little rough. And so when you said that they didn't do you and your family, and then I thought about and asked the question, well, how do you get your point across? Then I realized, actually, I was not getting my point across. My parents weren't getting their point across. So the model that I learned about how to deal with frustrations, you taught me right away how that didn't work. I'm glad I was in a place to hear it.
But just remember, we're still talking about the 7-year-old.
Oh yeah, my 7-year-old was in charge when I got to that place. And I learned later on how that wasn't going to help anybody because the first time I saw Jesse got angry, it scared me. It was like, he's never like that. He never gets angry. Wow. So he only had to show me once. I got the message. Okay, so now that James and Marion have all that information, what do they do? What do they do when the 7-year-old is in charge? Well, now it's time for compassion. It's important for them to have compassion for their reactive styles because they're defending themselves because they're scared. And that 7-year-old thinks that there's certainly death of the connection in the moment. But the primitive part of the brain thinks in terms of actual life and death. And so on a psychological, emotional level, the death of the connection could lead to the death of the relationship. So the person who is minimizing, they are just petrified that the relationship could end. The person who minimizes, they're thinking, well, maybe I'll have some relief if this relationship ends. So they're in stage 2. We talk about 3 stages of the relationship. In this stage 2, where all of the crazy stuff happens, there's an agenda for this stage of the relationship. And that is to be aware of growth that's trying to happen. That's what conflict is. When I learned that from Harville Hendricks, that conflict is growth trying to happen. Well, then it's really important to find out what the growth is. Also, healing is trying to occur as well. So before we get to that, let's talk about compassion a little bit. So when we talk about compassion, it starts with self-compassion. And you may have noticed that I like to use quotes and that kind of thing. Well, I went to Wikipedia in terms of describing a definition for self-compassion. And that is, self-compassion is extending compassion to oneself in instances of perceived inadequacy, minimizing, maximizing perceived inadequacy of having the power to make things better, to make things different. a feeling of failure in the moment or general suffering. And so in the moment, both partners are suffering. So it's really important to have compassion for that. And before you can have compassion for your partner, it's really important to have compassion for yourself. Now, how do you do that? How do you share compassion to yourself? So I'm going to share one more definition in terms of why this is important. And this is from the Harvard Medical School. Self-compassion yields a number of benefits, including lower levels of anxiety and depression. Person who has the maximizing kind of profile, they are filled with anxiety. The person who has the minimizing kind of profile, many times they're depressed. So self-compassion, people recognize when they are suffering and are kind to themselves. So this is not a time to judge. This is time to be aware and have compassion for what you discover about yourselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was something that we did, which helped us. It's something that James and Marion did that helped them. Because in that process of self-compassion, then anxiety and depression is reduced. Anxiety about the feeling of disconnection in the moment is reduced. Depression about the pain of reconnecting is reduced. So there's two things that we recommended to James and Marion in terms of how to begin to turn things around. The first how is to listen to inner dialogue, because we are really one of the things that we think is important, how important it is to disengage from the heat of the moment, not from the relationship, from the heat of the moment, and become reflective. Instead of reactive, to become reflective. And in that reflective state, since this is all about the connection, what is it that each person needs? What does James need so that he can come out of his shell and begin to reconnect with Marion? What does Marion need so when she calms down so that she can reconnect? So that takes us to step two. And step two is to keep peeling away the layers to discover and pinpoint what that is. What is that unmet need? What was that unmet need in that moment when communication broke down between the two of them? Mm-hmm. And then we'll talk about later about what to do about it. Okay, so those are the two steps for secret number 5. To know your profile, have compassion for it, and to take the 2 steps to listen to the inner dialogue, because usually there's negative thinking going on. We're wired for negative thinking. But when you're being reflective, you're looking for the facts of what's going on. You're listening to the feelings, and then you're also listening to the facts. So the feelings, they're related to what got triggered. The facts are related to, okay, so what can we do about it? But before we can do something about it, it's important to have compassion for it. Right. Okay. Okay. So now it is your turn. That's what some of my class say. Sometimes at the end of the session, it's like, okay, now here's your homework. A couple of times somebody has said something like that would be. So it's your turn. So just from what we talked about so far, think about how you react, because we talked about last time to identify whether your pattern is to minimize or maximize. So now that you have some sense of that, so now, and also we asked you last time to think about what you would want to change. So we want to take you a step backwards just a little bit and support you to take that compassion step, to do the thinking about what's going on and what it is that you need. What got triggered? I mean, what really got triggered? So, and again, no judgment zone. No judgment zone. So, if you would like to have support in getting a jump start on having compassion for yourself, for your profile, in terms of how you show up when there's a disconnect in your relationship, we invite you to set up a free telephone consultation with the two of us at jesseandmelva.com /consultation. Just leave your name, email address. We will respond within 24 hours. We'll set it up and we'll get going to help you to get that jump start.
Great.
Okay. So thank you again for joining us for secret number 5 and Secrets for Lasting Love. And we will see you next time. Be sure to sign up for a complimentary consultation. Until next time, take care. Bye.
All right.
Watch Live with Jesse and Melva right here on Solivity TV every Sunday at 5:30 Eastern. Solivity Magazine brings you the best in inspiration on Solivity TV. Check out our new shows. Mark your calendars for Solivity Magazine shows by going to solivity.com now.